Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to the May edition of Molten Music Monthly. Well, if that was May, then that means that was Superbooth. We've already talked a bit about Superbooth. We had some pre-Superbooth stuff in my last monthly, and then we had a live stream where we chatted about Superbooth and all the cool things that happened there. But I guess because it's May, because it sits here, I'm going to have to talk about it again. And that's good because there was a lot of stuff to talk about. It was a bumper festival this time in Berlin. Superbooth, 3 days of synthesis, Eurorack, crazy noises and bits and pieces all bleeping together in this wonderful, weird Fez Berlin building that gives itself over to this exploration of synthesizers and generally making bleepy bloopy noises. There's not really any possibility of me going through everything that was there, but I'm going to pick out perhaps my top 5, talk about those, and then talk about a few of the other bits and pieces around it as well, and finish off by trying to find anything else that sort of went on around that time as well. So let's get stuck in. And I'd just like to point out that most of the videos that are going to go on roundabouts in the background all more or less come from DivKid. He's like the hardest working man at Superbooth. I'm just taking the peach, the very small cream of the top. DivKid, he does the lot. But first, let's take a quick tangent and have a look at the latest nonsense coming in from Behringer, because that's always fun. Now, Behringer were at Superbooth. They had their RD909 on display and on demo and all those sorts of things working. And that was cool, but I didn't really spend any time over there because I had nothing particularly crushingly new. That is one of the things about Behringer's sort of marketing connection and willingness to talk about stuff that's just under development, is that it creates this buzz, and then by the time the actual product arrives, we've kind of largely forgotten about it. We kind of think, no, haven't we done that already? Haven't we been there already? Well, that doesn't seem to matter because they're just keeping on doing it. And then next thing that they've decided to unleash themselves upon is the behemoth of the Yamaha CS-80. Now, this is one of those things where you think, oh, it's a bit of a shame, but oh my goodness, we could get one of these, but oh, it's a bit of a shame. Oh, but then, you know, synthesizers. Because Yamaha sort of perked up a little bit recently and said to a community on their forum and asked the question, would people be interested in them reissuing a Yamaha CS-80? Because it had finally got up the chain that people were interested in classic old synthesizers. They like analog, big, meaty, chunky, full of sliders and faders type synthesizers. And so the Yamaha management sort of went, really? What, you mean like that old CS-80 that used to fall apart and crap out if you never keep in tune and was too heavy to move? What, that thing? And everybody went, yes, we want that, please, yes, please. So, you know, they just made inquiries. Would you be interested in it? Maybe we should make a new one that's sort of in the spirit of it or something. And we go, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Make a proper one. Make a real one. That would be great. We'd love that. Yeah, everybody goes, yeah, we'd love that. That'd be great. That'd be great. Because the danger is that if Yamaha get the idea of making a new version of the CS-80, then it will be just kind of some sort of motif crappy workstations. You know, some enormous thing that's packed full of enormous power that just doesn't invite you into play. It gives you a screen and messing about, and it's like, oh, fabulous sounds, Yamaha, but it's just not the hands-on touchy-feely thing that we want. We kind of want the real thing. So anyway, well, everyone was kind of glowing and thinking, wow, Yamaha might actually pull their finger out and do something about this. That would be amazing. And then Behringer said, oh, we could do it. We'll do it. Yeah, all right, give us 5 minutes. And they went off and they came back 5 minutes later with this render of what they're calling the DS-80. Not the BS-80, as people thought hilariously that it might be called. No, the DS-80. And Uli came up with this render of this keyboard that had absolutely everything from the CS-80 stuffed into it wherever they could. And said, there you go. Should we make one of those then? And everybody went, oh, excuse me, Yamaha. Someone who's actually going to make something potentially is talking to us over here. So what is it? Oh, right. Yeah, look. And everyone looked at the picture and went, no, that's really not it. Because it's taken everything from the CS80 and just stuck it in a new form, but the layout doesn't really make any sense. What you've done there kind of indicates that you don't really know what a CS80 is all about. Not that any of us do, really, but we like to think that we do. But the main things were that it had a very small touch strip. Now, if you have played the CS80, there are some key elements to it. One of them was the ribbon, the touch strip, the ribbon. It's very, very key in that movement of sound that you get in, well, of course, in Blade Runner, because that's what you associate the CS80 with really more than anything. That movement and the list and the pitch change and those sorts of things. So that was a first thing. Secondly, the performance controls. There's actually a lot of controls on the CS80 for changing the sound as you go. Things like brilliance and timbre and other stuff I now can't remember. But those were readily accessible there. And the other factor that Behringer had faithfully replicated was the preset remembering system. Because this was early days. The CS80 was an early analog polysynth. And they'd built in this way of remembering patches. And that was by having a bunch of sliders behind a hidden panel over on the left that replicated all of the controls on the top. And so you set those to replicate the controls on the top, and you could select them, and it would internally recreate that patch. I mean, it's brilliant, really, but huge. A huge system by which to remember up to four whole patches. Amazing. So Behringer had stuck that on the top left, which kind of seemed a bit, why would you do that? I mean, we have now microcontrollers which can quite happily remember everything that you've done to your system, and it's going to be that sort of thing inside the box, so why not just have a regular screen with a patch system? I mean, that seems to make sense. Makes sense to nearly everybody. Not everybody is happy with that, because the reason why, if you're going for authenticity, that preset section over there is all voltage driven. It's not microprocessors, it's voltage. And so when you select a preset from that patch memory, it's voltages that are moving about. And that brings with it the inaccuracy and the crazy zaniness, as well as the precision of CV, of voltage control. And that is part of the character of that synth, and changing from one patch to another is all part of that. And so if you take that out, as everybody has asked them to, because it's crazy having that thing there, then that you actually do lose something in the authenticity of the sound and the changing of the sounds and tones and stuff. At least that's what I understand, because I've never played on one. I've played on a plug-in version, you know. It's the same as everybody else. So there's that. So anyway, so the first reaction to the image was like, oh yeah, wow, this is going to be amazing, but you need to fix all these things. So Uli went off, did another render, came back, and said, well, there you go then. And he's taken out the patch memory, stuck in a little screen, but then he'd moved everything else around. He'd taken the performance controls and stuck those on the top left, kind of out of reach. And he'd taken the ribbon and said, so you want a bigger ribbon? And you know, the ribbons are the entire width of the keyboard, which also doesn't make any sense because ribbons aren't that big. And you tend to play with your right hand and move it with your left hand. So it doesn't need to be that size. Oh, anyway, so everybody came back in and said, yeah, that's all right, but you need your performance controls where you can actually reach them, and other bits and pieces. So Uli went away again, came back with a third version, which pretty much nails it, we have to say. He stuck in a sequencer, some effects, and extra bits and pieces over in that mysterious top left thing that you couldn't seem to fill with anything sensible. All the other controls are there, the performance controls are there, the ribbon is now a sensible size over a little bit to the left. It looks great. It looks great. So they're going to make one of those, I reckon. I mean, it's going to be years before we see it, but that's what Behringer do. They put the design together, the render together, and if people go, yes, or enough people go, yes, then they'll stick it into the production line and see what comes out the other end. Fascinating stuff. I mean, the one thing they haven't done is the performance controls actually on the original CS80 are paddles. So it's difficult to describe, but they, rather than sliders, they're kind of paddles like this, which again gives them a different feel. And if you're trying to replicate the feel of the CS80, then you kind of need to go with the paddles. But then other people have said, well, you know, they're the first thing to go wrong on the CS80 and they're difficult to replace and expensive and all that kind of thing. So maybe sliders are enough. Who knows? But amongst or underneath all this excitement about what Behringer are doing is poor old Yamaha. They're probably sitting there going, but we were going to make one. and you got a feel for them, really, because they're going to be completely undercut by the Behringer version. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is a moment. Maybe this is a moment of importance. Maybe this is something that Yamaha can go, no, stop this. We're going to build a phenomenal CS80 Mark II. It's going to be an amazing instrument. It's going to take advantage of all the modern manufacturing techniques, the same as Behringer do, so that we can get the price down to a sensible level, but we're going to make it a thing of beauty. And it's going to be an evolution. It's going to be authentic and all those sorts of things, but it's going to be something more. I think that's what Yamaha should do. They should definitely do it. They shouldn't be put off by what Behringer's doing, because Behringer will do their thing, and it will probably be awesome, and it will be really good value, and that's great. And that's great, but there's no reason, I believe, why Yamaha shouldn't do their own thing. The same as Moog do. Moog continue to do their own thing, and so they should. Everybody should. Because there's room for everybody, and there's always room for people who are prepared to pay extra for something that's more beautiful, it's more authentic, and more interesting. So yeah, so fascinating. And meanwhile, of course, behind all this, Behringer have released another image of another PCB that not telling us what it is, but it looks every bit like an ARP 2600. So we've got that coming along. But how many synths have they actually released at this point? Well, I've got my MS-101. I'll be doing a review on that soon, I hope, and some other bits and pieces. And it's good. It's good. No, that's it. Oh, well, of course, I've got the Neutron and the Model D. Yeah, that's fine. But everything else, still no sign of it. Still no sign of the 808. Still no sign of the 909. They reckon September for the 909. Probably the 9th of September, I imagine. The 808 apparently should be with us any time. Things like the Pro ones and the Odyssey, still, who knows? Still working on it, apparently. And that's part of the flaw in Behringer's thinking, is that we almost get bored of them by the time they turn up. But who knows? So there you have it. Potentially a CS80 clone, a DS-80 from Behringer. That's fascinating. Right, moving on. So my top 5 from Superbooth then, in no particular order, because I don't care about the order of things. I just think everything's wonderful. Equally wonderful. Which is why it's hard to carve out a top 5. But I'll go for it. I'll go for it anyway. Number 1, I say, or it could be number 5. I don't know. The first one, the one I'm going to talk about first, is the Pittsburgh Voltage Research Lab. Yeah. Interesting name, interesting product. So what's this all about then? Well, this kind of got teased before Superbooth, and then it came out and they launched it on Kickstarter during the show. And it's a really interesting instrument made up of a couple of Eurorack modules. So it can be modules, but they're sort of marketing it as an instrument in itself. It has this very interesting rake, this sort of old-fashioned, like a Putney synth kind of angle physicality to it, where you have the main synthesizer bit here and then you have a control surface down here. And these two things are independent, but obviously designed to work together. What you get in the synthesizer side of things is a kind of a West Coast influenced experimental complex oscillator and a second oscillator, a bunch of functions, some dynamics, interesting delay bits and pieces, all stuffed into a single voice, all together on a singular front panel, but sectioned off as if they were modules, very much like modules, with a whole stack of CV along the bottom. So you could see it as a whole bunch of modules to add to your Eurorack, or you can see it as a singular instrument. Depends really. None of it is normalized. It's all ready for patching, so you have to patch it into each other to make it kind of go. So it's very much in a modular vein. It's not trying to be a semi-modular synthesizer. It's meant to be a whole modular thing. The sort of sounds you can get out are otherworldly and crazy and awesome and fabulous and interesting. But what really excites me about the whole thing is how the modules and the sections within it are just unusual. I mean, you're starting with a complex oscillator to start with, which is always going to be interesting. Lots of wave folding and wave shapes. And they've done something weird with the wave shaping and pulse width modulation, in that they managed to skew sine waves and triangle waves as well as square waves and bits and pieces. So there's a lot of interesting sound generation and changing and weirdness going on in there. And then they've got function generators, which can do all sorts of things. They can be LFOs, they can be envelopes, they can do rhythmic weirdness and bits and pieces, and there's a couple of those. And then there's a dynamics area, which is sort of like a low pass gate essentially, and that has a filter and a voltage controlled amplifier inside, and that's doing strange things to the sound. And then at the end, I think there's a delay. Yeah, that's right, a bit of an analog delay, and all of this is running together within this single module with all this patching at the bottom. And there's extra things in the bottom as well, like there's a Molten, a logic gate, and other bits of weirdness. It's just a beautifully put together selection of modules, which you would probably assume is a synthesizer by itself, but they've designed it to be much more open than that, and that really, really appeals to me. Then on the bottom half, you have this controller, which has got a whole bunch of knobs, and then these touch strips, which is designed to be left and right, two sides. So two lots of 5 operating together, if you like, rather than a single keyboard. And that just brings acres and acres of modulation and change and triggering into the synth. You know, it's designed for interactive human control. That's also fascinating. So, you know, you're kind of combining 2 big lumps of fascination together to make a superlative fascinating instrument. This module thing. I don't know, I was really taken with it, so taken with it that I accidentally popped onto Kickstarter and pre-ordered the voice. Just the Eurorack version. I mean, the case is lovely, the whole instrument thing is lovely, but I don't really see that working in my space particularly. It'll be sitting there and I'll be trying to use it by itself and won't really know what to do with it. However, if I pull it into my Eurorack, oh dear, I might need another row, then I can see myself using elements of it all over the place. Because I've been looking at function generators, I've been looking at low pass gates as things that I think would be interesting in my own setup. And so this brings that in, along with a complex oscillator, which is also another thing I've been looking at. So in many ways, this represents a couple of grand's worth of modules I was thinking about perhaps moving towards in a rather nifty, small and much cheaper situation. And so that just really, really appealed to me. I'm very much looking forward to getting my hands on it so I can tell you what that's all about. Now, luckily, when I went to Superbooth, I was able to spend some time on the Pittsburgh stand and talk to them about it to sort of convince myself that I've made the right decision in getting hold of one. And I think I have. I'm pretty sure I have. Yeah, it's going to be interesting anyway. So yes, that's number 1, the Voltage Research Lab. Go and check it out from Pittsburgh Modular. What an interesting thing. The next thing, number 2, if you will. You know what? I think these probably are in order. Who knows? Number 2 is Soma Laboratories Pulsar 23. This is a big fat orange drum machine, or a rhythm maker, or rhythm synth effect maker rhythm thing. It's just an extraordinary thing. Sadly, I wasn't able to get a go. I did sit around on the Soma Labs stand trying to sort of muscle in, but somebody was determined to be having a go on it for the rest of the day, and so I didn't really get the opportunity. But I did look at it, and I was able to play with the Lyre 8 effects thing, which is just nuts. I mean, you can sit down with any of the Soma gear and just spend an hour going, what? But it responds to things. You just keep twiddling things, pressing things, knocking things, and the stuff comes out just sublime. And the Pulsar 23 is very much like that as far as I can tell. I mean, in essence, it's a 4-channel drum synth, I suppose. Each channel creates its own noise and craziness, and then it has this looping system. It's not a sequencer, it has kind of a looping system, so you create a loop and that keeps going around, and you add to it and layer and overdub and bits and pieces and just go crazy with it. So it's not looking to be step sequenced, it's looking to be performed. It wants you to make sounds, make noises and make those things happen. It's also got a ton of patch points. I think the 23 refers to 23 modules that are within this unit that you can wire together and patch together however you like and get to work and route in all sorts of extraordinary and interesting ways. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. I remember seeing the prototype ages ago, a video of that, thinking, this is amazing, this is going to be extraordinary. And it is, it absolutely is. I think everyone's been talking about it. There's been a lot of videos and stuff and time spent on it, and I can't wait to see more sort of narrow focused demos of it in action, in working with other bits and pieces rather than just video shot at the show. But fascinating. Pulsar 23, great colour, of course. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing that in the wild. Next up is the Motor Synth from Gamechanger Audio. Yeah, they kind of know they're onto a winner with this, don't they? Yeah, it's a thing. Right, so the idea of the Motor Synth is that you take these little DC motors, you know, like you'd find in Lego Technics, or little motors powering things. And you get this electromechanical motor, and it spins a little optical disc on the top, and on the optical disc you have engraved different wave shapes. And then you have something which reads those wave shapes. So as it spins, it creates a wave shape of a certain frequency, and that's read, and that creates the sound. Interesting, because an oscillator is just something which is spinning, isn't it? Rotating or oscillating. And so this takes that to a very natural conclusion, I suppose, because that's exactly what it's doing. And in this device, in this motor synth, you get 8 of these motors all spinning like crazy in order to generate the 4 voices that you can play with, the 4-note polyphony. You get 2 motors per voice. 2 motors per voice. Just seems weird. It's a very physical, very visceral way of generating oscillations, I suppose. It's like, what I want to see next, of course, is the hamster synth. I want to see a hamster synth when you've got 8 hamsters running on hamster wheels, and they're spinning, and that's being read, and their movement's being read, and you have your keyboard pokes the hamsters to make them run faster. I think that would be awesome. So yeah, that would be the next thing. But that's the idea. It's a physical thing, physically moving about that's generating the sound. And combined with the infrared reading of these waves that are spinning and being generated here, there's also a magnetic pickup in there, like I guess on a guitar, which takes the mechanical noise, the moving noise of the spinning motors, which is another interesting idea. And that's then mixed back into the sound and gives you this very mechanical, very grungy, very interesting sound. One of the things I really liked, because they initially did a demo at NAMM on this big keyboard that had dozens of these things inside. It wasn't really working. I think this is a much more achievable synthesizer in this kind of form factor. But anyway, what I mean is that there was a sense of the motor speeding up and slowing down as you played the keys. And that gives it a kind of a lilt, it gives it a slew, it gives it a physicality, because you're moving physically from one speed to another, accelerating and decelerating. And that's very interesting. That adds a whole other flavour to the synthesizer, I think. So yeah, nothing that we've ever seen before, I guess. And Gamechanger Audio appeared to smugly be aware of that very much. There's other things in there as well. You've got envelopes and filters and bits and pieces. You've got these 8 buttons that do stuff, but it also has apparently a very innovative looping and layering system. So rather than a sequencer, you're sort of looping and layering, I guess a bit like the Pulsar 23. Who knows? Not really seen much talk on that bit as yet. And it also has this ability to track an input from an external source and match up with the pitch of that. So it's sort of detecting a pitch on the input and then harmonizing itself around it, which could be interesting. Plug a guitar in, play it, and the motor synth plays along. I think that's the idea. Now, they've just launched this on Indiegogo, and it funded in seconds, I think. They was putting the first 50 out there for $749, which is a great price for a polyphonic, electromechanical driven desktop synthesizer. And I think you can still pick one up for $949 on the Indiegogo campaign, which is only going to be valid or active for a month. And then after that, it's going to be something like $12.99 retail. So if you want one, get one now, would be my advice. I would love to have a go at the show. It was too noisy, too crazy. You didn't really have any clue what was going on. The place was thick and surrounded by people all the time. So there was no opportunity really to get down to, can I initialize a patch and work out what it sounds like. No, that wasn't really happening. But hopefully something like that will come along at some other point. Number 4, I've got down a bit of Eurorack, the Make Noise Mimeophon. Mimeophon. It's, what do they call it? It's a sound hack mimeophone repeater. I love Make Noise. They just amuse me. Just because they're poets. That's what they are. They're poets. They're not electrical engineers. No, they're bleeding poets, because all of their stuff, it never actually tells you what it is. Doesn't matter what it is, they won't tell you. It's not something that's ever been thought of or conceived of before. It is something unique that's just emerged out of our creative playing with various compounds of stuff. And this is one of those. It's a Mimeophon repeater. It's a delay, right? It's a stereo delay. It's what it is. It's a stereo delay. If we can just get that established to start with, that would be really, really helpful. And then we'll know exactly what it is that we're talking about. You stick signals in and you get a ding, 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 ding signal out the other end, but in stereo. But it has lots of interesting things in there along the way, which allows them to talk about it in different ways. I mean, a Mimeophon is apparently a reference to the old duplicating machines, which, like my mum was a secretary many, many years ago when I was a kid, and she did a lot of duplicating, which was when you had carbon stuff and, you know, this big drum that you would roll, and bits of paper would go in and shoot out the other end as you roll this thing. You know, this isn't the days before photocopying. You were not taking a photo of something, you were kind of taking an engraving, almost like a lino cut of something. And that's an interesting way to describe delay, because they're not saying that it's an exact copy of what went in, they're saying that it's something else, something more physical, something more interesting, something more poetic than an echo. It's not an echo, mate. No, it's a Mimeophon repeat. So what does this thing have on it? I can't remember. Yeah, they don't have anything on the website yet, so I'm going to have to try to redo this largely from memory. But if I remember rightly, there was something about different zones. So rather than having a time knob, like you'd expect really on a delay, they have a zone knob. And this is like ever decreasing circles. It's like these internal concentric circles, and you're moving from one zone to another. And you can move immediately from one place to another without it dragging like a tape loop, without it dragging the pitch up and down. So you can do short delays then up to long delays without anything else going on at all. So you have a zonal control. And then within each of these zones, you then have a rate control, which kind of, you know, fluctuates between one place and another. And with that, you can create pitch changing effects. So you move to another zone and then you can change the delay time within that and slew that about all over the place. You then have interesting controls like halo, which adds a bit of smear to the whole thing, perhaps a bit of granularness going on. And then color, which is, you know, changing the brilliance and the tone of the sound as it skips its way through this very interesting module. And Make Noise are starting to play with stereo in a big way, and there's a skew control which offsets the left and right. So you've got left and right coming through and it sort of offsets it. So the delay, rather than an equal ping pong, you're getting other things going on that's affecting the stereo field. So this is very much feeding into their X-Pan module as well, which is a stereo mixing, panning device, trying to move Eurorack Modular out of its mono-ness and into a more interesting stereo thing, which I think is great. I think that's a very positive direction that everything should be going in. It's just, it can be difficult because it means doubling up on things, perhaps. But something like the Mimeophon, a stereo delay where you're putting something in and getting a bit more of a stereo feel coming out, I think that's interesting and useful. It just depends on where you can find to put it in your signal chain in your rack itself. There's all sorts of other interesting things like a flip control to hang on to the buffer inside and do interesting things with that. I don't know, I mean, perhaps it seems odd to have this delay module up there as one of my top 5, but it was just a delight to listen to. It felt really open and interesting and creative and different. It had, I think it sort of had elements of clouds in there, elements of the magneto, and other things that I like in delays, as well as being a straightforward, put stuff in, interesting things comes out type of effects processor. And that really appeals to me. And I can't help but fall in love with the way that Make Noise talk about stuff. So I think that's a really interesting thing. I think also, I mean, Erica Synths also did a stereo delay, which similarly looks interesting. Much, much simpler, but it has the ability to layer sounds on top of each other. It has like an inbuilt sampler. And that has another interesting thing. I'm really enjoying how effects processing and audio processing is coming into Eurorack more and more with interesting things going on. It seems like You know, clouds was the last interesting thing that was ever made as far as audio processing goes. Everything else is to do with processing an individual or shaping a sound as opposed to applying effects to it. Or you just have DSP effects at the end of something, or whacking great big reverb, something like that. So what I like about these modules is that it's given you a way to do interesting things with your signals in a standard delay, but then expands and does interesting things with itself. I'm not really sure I'm explaining this very well, but all I can say is that the Mimeophon really appealed to me, as did the Erica Synths one. As I say, they're two very interesting delays, and I like a good delay, and I will get to the bottom of the magneto, wherever it is. I promise, one day I will. So last on my top 5 list from Superbooth was Instruo. You know, they overwhelm you with the beauty and elegance of their modules. I mean, they might be doing something really, really simple. It doesn't really matter, because the look of the module and the way somehow it emanates class and fabulousness just by existing. And you just go, core. At least that was my reaction, really. They had 2 really interesting modules at Superbooth. First one, I mean, I don't have any idea how you pronounce these things, because they have this habit of calling them weird stuff. Weird stuff that makes an idiot like me trip up and feel embarrassed. So I go, anyway, so the first one, Instruo, is the Arbhar. The Arbhar. I'm going to call it the Arbhar, right? Okay. And it's a granular audio processor. What does that mean? Well, it's a bit of a sampler. You stick some sound in, and then you scan across it. So you got imagine a waveform, and you get a chunk of time, and you go, and you scan that across, and you can make that very, very small and just pick out individual grains, individual tiny little bits of samples. You can make it bigger and pull the whole thing out, and you can wang it around, and that generates this interesting granular form of synthesis that we quite like. We quite like it. And the Arbhar manages to do this in just the most beautiful way possible. Well, of course it does. Of course it does, because it's Instruo. So rather than having a waveform display, you've got a bunch of lights behind this kind of front panel golden wave. And these lights move about and light up, showing you what the heck's going on. And then you move these lights about behind with the thing. It's like playing that game. We used to have a game of, when I was a kid, where you had these 2 knobs that you moved this light bulb under this, I think it was a sea battle type game, and then you press a button to see whether it exploded whatever was sitting on top. But by the by, for some reason it reminds me of that. That's no indication of what this is like at all. But the idea of it is that you stick sound in, and then you granulate it and move it about, and you shift it around, and you pull out all sorts of textures and interesting things from it. It's not designed to be a sampler where you're loading samples necessarily. It's very much for sampling on the fly. So much so that it actually has an inbuilt condenser microphone, so it can just pick up whatever it is that's going on around you and stuff that in. You have control over density and spread and intensity and pitch and all these sort of different things that we don't really understand. It's just sitting there begging to be played with. You just want to have a go. You want to see what happens if I stick this through it, or if I shout at it and then use that, or sing into it, play guitar into it, take another signal from the Eurorack, take something from a synth, stuff that in, whatever. You just want to play. And one of the problems with granular synthesis I found in the past is that it's just difficult. What are we doing again? And trying to understand what the heck is going on, and where these samples and where these sounds come from. We have these huge sounds come out of granular systems based on some sample from somewhere, whereas this is all going to be based on stuff that you're doing as you're doing it. And I think that invites you into some kind of closeness to that sound, some kind of responsibility for it, rather than just playing with other people's samples. That's very interesting. What's also interesting, when you turn it off, it's all gone. So Instruo are very much into you capturing the sound at that moment, not so interested in you getting some kind of SD card full of samples and stuffing that in and browsing through stuff. Nah, that's not what it's about. It does have the ability to hold on to a couple. If you've found something that's just fabulous and you need to keep it, you can do that. It will let you do that. But there's no SD card, no way to offload them anywhere else. You just have to save them within the memory of the unit. And probably what I failed to mention is that there's 6 layers of sampling going on. Each one can record up to 10 seconds. So you can record into 6 different layers and then move between those and use different ones and stuff. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting hold of that. I mean, perhaps you can see with all of this that I'm gradually moving towards a sort of an esoteric row of Eurorack. I mean, this is all good standard stuff. Oscillators, envelopes, filters, mixing, that sort of thing. But what I'm lacking are those crazy creative and out there stuff. And I think with having the Pittsburgh, the Voltage Research Labs, Voice, having a Mimeophon and the Instruo Arbhar, and the next one I'm going to talk about, all those in a rack, that would be quite something different, I think. So yeah, that's half a plan. I'm going to have to sell the Mother 32 and other bits and pieces, I'm afraid. Exciting though, isn't it? Exciting. The other thing that Instruo had was a module called Lunbadh. It's a dual looper. It just looks totally fantastic. You've got like this reel-to-reel on the front, although it's not a reel-to-reel, it's lights going around looking like a reel-to-reel with a couple of knobs on it. And it's kind of a twin tape deck. The idea being that you record onto one side of it and then you can record an overdub onto the next one, like a twin tape deck. And the things spin and it moves and you stuff in and you crossfade between one and the other and you layer things up and overdub. And it's just a fabulous thing to watch it working. To see it moving is just like, wow, that's interesting. You can record up to 45 minutes on each side. I mean, potentially you could use it as a recorder within your Eurorack. But I think the idea is that you take in more of an environmental sound or a soundscape, and then you're working with that environment because you can speed it up and slow it down and send it backwards and forwards and cross modulate, reloop and all sorts of stuff. It's just fascinating. I mean, it's relatively simple, I think, certainly compared to the Arbhar, but that makes it no less elegant and wonderful and interesting. And in some ways, I'm a bit more fascinated as to what people are actually going to do with that, because it doesn't, for me, have obvious, oh yeah, it's a stereo delay, you do this, oh, it's a filter, it does this. No, this is a bit more interesting. It's more, is it a field recorder? Is it a recorder of your system? Is it something with which you bring in incidental sound or unexpected stuff or soundscapes? Or is it more exploratory than that? Or is it simpler and more obvious than that? I don't know, maybe you bring an entire drum track. I don't know. Or maybe you record bits off your Eurorack as you go and other synths and other bits and pieces. I don't know. You know, it's very wondrous and dazzling somehow. But there you go, those are the 2 modules that Instruo brought along, and that finishes off, I think, my top 5 from Superbooth. Now there was loads and loads and loads of stuff at Superbooth. There's still more of it. Seems to be coming out all the time. More and more videos are emerging with things you hadn't even thought of or hadn't even seen. There was so much Eurorack, so many synthesizers. You just don't know quite what to do with it all. I mean, just to pick out a few more, I mean, Erica Synths had a whole range of modules, including a really interesting sequencer that had very much a vintage vibe to it while having really interesting stuff behind it. And Doepfer also had a sequencer. So did Frap tools. They had this oval shaped one that went around in a circle with all sorts of things and stuff going on. It's highly complicated, very interesting. Polyend had something called the preset, I think it was, which is this matrix of 9 knobs and 9 channels into which you could record 9 control voltages that you could then squirt back out again. So you could record modulation into it, or just set voltages or pitches or sequences, anything up to about 30 seconds long, and save that as a patch and then pump it all back into your Eurorack. Very interesting. There were some massive synthesizers like the Udo Super 6. There was a Novation Summit, of course, which probably literally is 2 peaks packed into a workstation keyboard with a few more controls revealed on the front. It's kind of everything that the Peak probably should have been to start with in order to properly see itself in competition to Dave Smith Instruments or to Core Prophecies and that kind of thing. The Peak, the desktop unit, lovely though it is, never seemed to quite have the same impact as having a big synthesizer keyboard, and now they've nailed that, I think, with the Summit. Electron, of course, had their weird digitone keys thing. What's that about? Not quite sure what that's about, but there you go. Good for right-handed people or left-handed people, I suppose. Yeah, a bit of a weird one, that one. There was also another SH-101 clone called the Space Bee, the SB1, which was unique in its ability to be portable and battery driven, or at least on rechargeable batteries, which is kind of interesting. And it's also black, so you can't really see it very well, particularly if you're playing a gig. But of course, how is that going to match up? I mean, they reckon it's going to cost 700-800 quid. You could almost buy 3 MS-101s for that. I don't know how you fit yourself into that market myself. There's a whizzy little drum machine from IK called the Uno drum, which fits beautifully with their Uno synth. It's just 20 drum kits inside, little pads, little touch pads, and a sequencer. Drum machine makes noises, simple, effective, create patterns, off you go. I think that's nailed it. I mean, drum machines tend to be overcomplicated, tend to be expensive. We still haven't seen the RD808 come through to try to sort all of that out. So something like a 200 quid drum machine from IK, yeah, that's all right. There's a new company called the Division Department there as well, with their not a drum machine, which I can't quite wrap my head around it. It seems to be a 4-channel drum synth. So you've got 4 channels of drum synth, but there's no sequencing inside. There's no inbuilt pattern making or anything like that. It's just a sound source, but then it also has no USB and it has no CV gate either. So it purely runs on MIDI, which seems a bit archaic at this point. So I don't know, but apparently it sounds really good. You just need to have a MIDI sequencer or a MIDI interface on your computer. I mean, who has one of those these days? There's a great little oscillator from Soundforce called the DCO, which has all these sliders on it. So you create a mix of waveforms on the oscillator itself, which is really nice. It's actually quite like the oscillator section of the SH-101. Yeah, very Roland-esque. Very nice, very interesting. I was impressed by that. There's a new synth by Dreadbox. There was an MFB synthesizer that we didn't see until the last day. In fact, I still don't know anything about it. Just acres and acres of stuff. It was a phenomenal Superbooth. So much to play with. I had such a great time going along as well. So many people to shake hands with. I took selfies with people. That felt really nice. People coming up and introducing themselves. That was lovely. Always appreciate that. A big shout out to all the people I shook hands with or took photos with. That was great. I had a lovely time on the This Is Not Rocket Science booth with their booth stolen from Ensoniq, apparently from years ago. They had these things you stuck on your head and general weirdness, and they had their Phoenix 4 synthesizer there as well, which is this incredibly fabulous, surprisingly not huge, but packed full of tons and tons of modular synthesizer. It's not done in Eurorack format, although it takes the same voltages and patch cables. But it's just this wall, small wall, you could nicely put on your wall, of modular synthesis all tied in together, which just made incredible noises with tons and tons of different modules inside. I enjoyed that tremendously. I enjoyed Future Sound Systems with all their craziness going on. I popped down to Black Corporation and played on the Committee. I also had the opportunity to run into Dieter Doepfer again, which was great. He remembered me, which made me feel fabulous. And we chatted about he's got a line of slimline modules of packing a whole load of stuff into a small space, including the entire synth voice in a very small module. So that was interesting. And along with some great food and some not so great weather and meeting some fabulous people, it was definitely worth the trip. And maybe one year I'll go for more than a day. Right, moving on. Something which did come out before Superbooth, but it also came out the day after I did my April video, and that's the Moog Matriarch. Now this is a thing. This is Moog doing what they do best, creating an extraordinary instrument with an extraordinary vibe and a presence to it, which no one else seems to be able to get anywhere near. I mean, some people don't like the colour schemes they've gone for. Fine, yeah, whatever. Not the least bit interested. I think it's an awesomely beautiful thing. Colour is fantastic, I think. And the braveness, the courage that Moog have in doing these sorts of things is just amazing. They're unfazed, completely unfazed by things like the Model D from Behringer or other bits and pieces going on in the market. They just want to go off and have a hippie party somewhere and just have a fabulous time and a fabulous life. And that's the kind of thing I think we should all get behind. So the Moog Matriarch is very much that. Obviously it follows on from Grandmother and the other bits and pieces that he's been doing, and it brings this hippie, cool, psychedelic, weird synthesis vibe that's just unlike anything else that you'll find. It's not bleeps and bloops, it's bleeps and bloops and fat sounds and a laid backness. You could be on the beach playing with this thing, whoosh, creating soundscapes, creating just awesome records with this stuff. That's what you're doing. You're actually making music with it. You're not farting around making noises and wondering what to do with it. You are going to make music with this thing. So what is it exactly? Well, it's a beautiful keyboard synthesizer, bigger than the Grandmother. It has 4-note polyphony, which goes through a paraphonic system, which means that there's a single signal path for all of the notes going through it. So each individual note isn't articulated individually. It's articulated paraphonically through the system rather than polyphonically, although the notes, of course, are polyphonic. Yeah, you want to check out Mark Doty's treatise on paraphonic, polyphonic and variophonic stuff, because it's getting complicated in talking about these things. And Mark, also known as Automatic Gainsay, is on a mission to try to get these formats more formulated, more put together and understood, because companies are using them very, very weirdly. There's this whole thing between polyphony and paraphony and these other phonies, and it is getting a bit wearing as to how we actually understand it. But as far as the Matriarch's concerned, you've got 4-note polyphony. You can play 4 notes at once, so that's polyphony. But rather than each one having its own filter and its own envelope and its own VCA, they are then funneled down the same signal chain together, and that makes it paraphonic. At least that's my understanding. Yeah, let's go with that. So you have these 4 oscillators with 4 waveforms that you can mix and cross-modulate and sync into each other and stuff about. And then, although it's normalized through its own signal flow, you can also patch things all over the place. It has a dual analog ladder filter, which means you can shift and offset peaks to each other, and it comes out on a lovely stereo kind of thing. And then there's 2 envelopes, one for the filter and another one for the dual VCA. And there's 2 LFOs with 6 waveforms. And all in all, there's something like 90 patch points all over this lovely looking machine. I mean, it's far more expanded upon than the Grandmother was, and offers, I think, probably a deeper and more involved synthesizer experience. It doesn't have the spring reverb that the Grandmother had, but instead it has a stereo delay, and it also has quite a large polyphonic sequencer all in there. Now, I did get a chance to get a play at Superbooth. This is one of the key things I wanted to do, was to have a play on the Matriarch, and found one that wasn't being used, which was a miracle in itself, because the room that they were in was packed. And put the headphones on, and there was just couldn't get any sound. Fiddled a bit, no sound. Oh, and then there was a sound, and then I hit this bit where this sound came out, and you just went, yes, that's exactly what I mean about why these Moog synthesizers are head and shoulders above anything else. It just has this sound. That sound came out, and then that sound disappeared, and I could not find it again. It went fart and glitch, and there was just some weird stuff going on inside it, and that all that I could assume from my fiddling was that either I had no clue what I was doing and I was messing about, or it was probably broken. And I think it was probably broken, because it didn't make any sense. There was nothing happening anything like it was supposed to. Every now and again, a fantastic sound would come out, and then it would just descend into craziness. So it felt like there was an LFO in there that was turning stuff, switching it from this to that, and this to that in a very alarming way. I could not get it to behave. So I have to believe, my faith is not shaken in the Moog. I have to believe that it was just somehow screwed up. And what I probably should have done is turned it off and rebooted it, and then see what happened. Because, funnily enough, just over there was Mime Melodies and Look Mum No Computer making fantastic sounds out of a Matriarch. Just sounded beautiful, whereas mine was going... Anyway, so the Moog Matriarch. Now that is a Moog synth I would very much like to have. Assuming that I can't afford a Moog 1. I mean, Moog, if you're out there, I would be super interested in doing a lovely little review of the Moog 1, or the Grandmother for that matter. But the Matriarch is probably, to me, the sweet spot. That's a a really nice 4-note synthesizer. Oh yes, about £2 though. That's the thing. You know what? I think that'll do. I think that's enough. I think that's enough. We've had some meaty stuff to talk about, and I've enjoyed talking about these things at a bit more length than the usual quickness that I give a whole bunch of different products. So I'm happy. I'm happy with that. Now, if any of you are around on Sunday, this Sunday, we're going to have another go at having a live stream, 8 o'clock this Sunday. I don't even know what date that is. That's the 2nd of June. We're into June, so we'll have a go at that. Do keep your eye on social media though, because I will confirm that, I think, because funnily enough, I haven't actually checked if I'm doing anything Sunday night. I don't think I am. So let's say Sunday night, 8 o'clock, and I will tweet and confirm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those usual sort of things. We can get together and chat about a bit more about Superbooth or some new stuff coming up or anything you fancy. I might even demonstrate a bit of the Complete Audio 6, which is what I've got here from Native Instruments, doing a bit of modulation of the Eurorack. Maybe I should do that. That might be interesting. Or I could play some tunes on the MS-101. Ooh. Or I got some other synth out the back here I might want to play with. I don't know, exciting times. We can just make it up as we go, and that's the beautiful thing about our live streams, is that we do just make it up as we go. So come along, join the conversation, chat, ask me questions, anything you like. Could be surface related, could be synthesizer related, could be any sort of music technology type related, and I'm quite happy to talk about it and poke around with a little bit of personal abuse. That's generally what we do. So that's cool. Come and join us. That would be awesome. Coming up in my video stream, I have, let me think, what do we have? I don't know. I mean, I've got this great idea, right, about doing some synth videos that I'm going to be pursuing. So I've got a couple of little synths now, and I want to start doing some kind of live looping videos with them, just making sounds, then making another sound and layering it on top, I think that's going to be quite interesting. So I'm going to have a go at a bit of that. I'll be making videos soon on the Complete Audio 6 and the DC coupled nature way of connecting with modular synthesis and back again. That's going to be interesting. There's also Bitwig 3 to do that in, and Ableton Live 10.1 to try that out with as well. I have to kick off the build of my Decals Dream very soon as well. I'm going to start doing videos on that. I have a video to do on Elephant, which is turning the Surface dial into a MIDI controller. So I've got that coming up. And now that I've done all my performance testing on the Surface Pro 6, I want to move beyond that now into more creative things, showing different bits of software, how they work, combining synthesizers, software, DAWs, all that stuff. Lots and lots and lots of stuff to come. And you will not get such interesting, deep and diverse content on any other channel. Keep it right here on Molten Music Technology. Also combining Molten Modular, combining Surface Pro Audio, combining all sorts of things. It's just me in here making stuff with stuff. It's fantastic. So join us on social media, follow us along, subscribe, notifications, all that kind of thing. Or if you're feeling particularly brave, do pop along to Patreon. Throw me a couple of dollars because it's a laugh, right? A couple of dollars would be awesome. I might be able to buy a new shirt or invest in my little fund for a Moog 1. Not really, that's never going to happen. But, you know, come and join in. Get into the conversation and let me know what you think. That would be great. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.